On February 17th, rather, 2011, David Duerson, a former four-time NFL Pro Bowler, 1987 NFL Man of the Year, and Super Bowl champion, stripped naked, got into bed, pulled covers over his head, and shot himself in the chest with a revolver. Now, minutes before doing this, he sent a text out to his family. He said, "Please see that my brain gets to the NFL brain bank." And the reason why is he knew he had a problem, he knew there was something wrong with him, and he wanted to make sure that he was able to contribute to the safety and the health of current and future football players by donating his brain for research. So it's a tragic story, but football has a serious concussion problem. And it goes all the way from the NFL down to your next door neighbor's son who may play in a rec league role. David Duerson's case is not an isolated issue. And when it comes down to the concussions that players are sustaining, they're willing to take additional risks because in the NFL there are multi-million-dollar contracts on the line. They're willing to take those risks with their own bodies in the effort to actually inflict damage on the bodies of their opponent so that they get the bigger hits. And in my experience, when I watch football just as a fan, looking at the way that players hit, it's changed over the course of time. And part of the reason for that is the safety equipment that is used. So the safety equipment is designed to protect players, but it also gives them a false sense of security. It makes them feel like they're almost invincible out there and they're willing to go out and hit harder, run as fast as they can, and plow into somebody in a way that they wouldn't have had they not had that kind of equipment. So in my years in college, I played a little bit of rugby. Rugby is actually the sport on which the rules of football were originally based. And there's one main difference with the types of safety equipment that football players wear to what's worn in rugby, and that is in rugby, there isn't any safety equipment. So that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about here today. I want to talk about the concussion controversy, exactly what the reasoning is for those concussions, what's causing it, and how safety equipment contributes to the problem, and then also what you can do about it either in a local level or all the way up to the other level. So concussions are one of the most controversial topics in sports today. There is a lawsuit that was just recently settled by the NFL where they were willing to actually settle without a cap on what they're paying out to former football players. 5,000 football players actually sued the NFL for covering up some of the long-term impacts that playing football has on your mental health. In this settlement, the NFL admitted three main things that they were never willing to admit before. They said, first off, that the NFL, believes that 1 out of every 3 former players will have some sort of health problems down the line due to playing football. They also mentioned that playing football will increase the risks. And the third thing that they mentioned was that problems will develop sooner in former players than they will in the general population. And these are 3 things that the NFL strongly denied in the past that they recently admitted with this settlement. So there was a study done recently by Boston University to study chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is CTE. That's what I'm going to call it for the rest of the presentation. CTE is the most common health problem that is being discovered in former football players. And the problem with it is that you can't actually find CTE until you diagnose it post-mortem. So it's very difficult to actually tell whether or not someone like David Duerson is struggling, without actually talking to them and having them admit, yes, that they have a problem and that they need help. So out of the brains that were studied in this study, which is the largest CTE study to date, 34 of them were former NFL players, and 33 had signs of CTE. And this is where the NFL's brain bank is that David Dorkson was talking about. It's at Boston University. So, what is the main cause for this type of increase in concussions and brain injuries? When players feel like they can go out there and actually deliver hits without any consequences to themselves or without worrying about the consequences to their opponents, there's a lot higher potential for them to actually hit in a way that could cause negative impacts. So, like I said in my introduction, it gives them a false sense of security that they can just go out there and do whatever they want on the football field and hit however they want, whether it's within the rules or not sometimes, and not think about the long-term consequences. So, because of the fact that in the NFL you have your helmet, and helmets are being designed now to actually mitigate some of the concussion risk. So they're making advancements in that way, but the advancements that are being made don't really bring it up to the point where you can go out there and you can hit like that without a consequence down the road. So the wrap tackle versus the spear tackle, that's the main difference here, and what I'm going to talk about with the ways that players are hitting. In the old days, they used to actually do a wrap tackle or a form tackle. So they would absorb the impact with their shoulder and grab the player's legs with their arms and actually drive them to the ground that way. So in a spear tackle, which is what you see a lot more today, they're launching themselves head down at their opponent. And when you get hit with a helmet, it's a lot harder than getting hit with a shoulder or with an arm. So that's the main change that you've seen over the last several years with football players and the way that they hit. So who here watches football on a regular basis? Okay. So Professor Carbonell's a little busy, so I'm going to have you guys come up here for just a quick demonstration of the difference between the wrap tackle and the spear tackle. I should probably put him on defense then, I guess. So just stand right here, and Jason, I'll put you on defense. So you're carrying the ball, and show just in slow motion basically what a wrap tackle is. So you don't actually take them to the ground, right?
I'll take it to the ground.
I go for legs.
Right. Right, exactly. Your head was to the side, out of the way, and you absorb the impact with your shoulder. So in a spear tackle, just a quick demonstration of that. Exactly, right. So your arms aren't really a part of the picture. It's more impactful, more, there's going to be a louder sound, and that's going to get you on SportsCenter, but it's a lot more dangerous to both you and to your opponent. Makes sense. All right, so the media always glorified these hits. Up until about the point of that lawsuit, the media actually talked a lot about hard hits, and they would show clips on SportsCenter. I'm going to show one in a little bit that glorified this type of hitting, this high-impact spear tackle. The hardest hitters received the most exposure, guys like Troy Polamalu, who ran around and almost didn't have a role in the defense other than to find the ball and hit the guy. He was known for that, and he got a lot of exposure from that. He got endorsement deals, bigger contracts, and that's because that type of spear tackling causes the hardest hits. So I'm going to show you a clip now of ESPN and how they actually used to glorify those types of tackles. While we're watching it, just pay attention to the ways that the guys who are on set are actually talking about the hits.
Check it out again. David Garrard got number 4, Sammy Parker on the reverse. Ronaldo Hill gonna drill it, and Sammy Parker Shut up! Number 2, William Henderson, what a great hit. This is the first time I ever saw it. The helmet, the mouthpiece, the ear guard. Oh, William Henderson got shut up.
So you can kind of see how they're, laughing about it and being very cavalier with the type of hits that you saw there. So, the solution, the rugby solution that I was mentioning before, they have no safety equipment, no shoulder pads, no helmets, and so they're forced to wrap tackle. It's something that you don't really have much of an option other than to do that. Now, the only types of headgear that rugby players really wear to prevent scrapes and cauliflower ear in kind of a scrum type situation. So it doesn't actually prevent against concussions. So in conclusion, economist Gordon Tullock, he talked about automobiles, and he said that cars actually becoming safer, so to speak, with anti-lock brakes and seat belts and airbags actually made drivers drive more carelessly. And he said that if you mandated putting a spear on a steering wheel, then people would think about the consequences, and they would be less likely to actually go out there and do something that was reckless. So higher risk, more precaution, the same thing applies to football. So just to summarize, basically concussions are a serious risk, and a serious problem in football. Safety equipment is probably the main cause for that because of the false sense of security. And eliminating that equipment would make football safer at any level. So, questions?